All right, everyone, let the debate begin. We've got our first initial college football playoff rankings from the selection committee. We also have an explanation of why the teams placed where they do and some of the controversial decisions that at least get this entire deal started. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, breaking down the game we love each and every day, discussion, debate, and analysis like nowhere else. And of course, this has become like Bowl Selection Sunday, like some other days on the sports calendar, this has become an event when the College Football Playoff Selection Committee makes its rankings revealed each and every week. And of course, there is the debate and the discussion regarding what is the criteria and what should be the criteria for these rankings. It certainly has to do with wins and losses. It has to do with the results on the field in regards to the interpretation of the performance, the dominance or the lack thereof of the dominance, and of course, who you played, if you beat them, and if you lost, did you lose to a quality team and did you perform well in that particular game? All right, we've got 32 on the line. I appreciate you dropping by. We're going to, again, go through the rankings, and I found it interesting to compare my most recent rankings, the top 25 that actually makes sense versus the college football playoff rankings, and they are pretty much step in step to this point. So my kudos to the College Football Playoff Selection Committee. And then, of course, the real debate, the real conversation has to do with looking at the rankings, determining what the selection committee is valuing currently, and then looking at the matchups going forward and playing out scenarios in which we're trying to project how these teams are going to land if so-and-so occurs. So we'll get to that in just a second. The call-in line is open at 860-325-3687, 860-325-3687. So please call in. And of course, I'm going to run down. Oh, and I'm going to need some water at some point. My goodness, I didn't equip myself with water, but we'll get to that at some point. Maybe I'll put a caller on and I will just go grab some water and hydrate. All right, let's get to it here. So I've got the rankings in front of me. Let's start at 25, and of course, we'll breeze through the first portion of this because it will not factor into the college football playoff. Hang on just a second. Let's run through this real quick. SMU's at 25. They just lost. Navy at 24 just came up with a big win against UConn. Oklahoma State making a statement for the Big 12 with 3 losses at number 23. We got Boise State at 22. They've won unimpressively recently. And again, whoever just called me, call right back in just about 3 minutes after we dive through the top 25. Much made of the Cincinnati ranking at 20. Let's first get to Memphis at 21. And the strength of the American Conference in comparison, let's say, to the ACC that boasts just Clemson and then Wake Forest. And that's it, where the American Conference is stacked up there between 20 and 25. We've got Wake at 19, Iowa at 18, Minnesota. There's much debate there to be had at number 17. I will get to the calls in just a second. Kansas State with a big win against Oklahoma. Probably the surprise, not of these rankings in regards to what they've accomplished, but if we would go back to the first week of the season and say Kansas State's going to be at number 16 in the initial rankings, that would have been a surprise to many. Notre Dame at 15, Michigan 14, Wisconsin 13. So they basically stack up the head-to-head outcomes of those 3 teams when you talk Wisconsin throttling Michigan and then Michigan throttling Notre Dame. Again, Wisconsin at 13, Michigan 14, and Notre Dame at 15. Baylor, undefeated right now, starting to rack up some decent wins in the Big 12. And of course, their toughest games have yet to be played. At number 12, Auburn at 11 with a strength of schedule that matches just about anybody in the country. Florida at 10, Oklahoma at 9. Utah and Oregon, of course, they're on a collision course for the Pac-12 championship game, and Pac-12 supporters hope that it's an 11-1 versus 11-1 matchup for the strength of that conference. Georgia with the disappointing loss against South Carolina, a 24-point favorite in that game against the South Carolina team that's under 500, still sits at number 6. Clemson, defending national champion with a bad resume, but undefeated, and despite the one scare against North Carolina, dominant otherwise at number 5. Penn State strength of schedule comes into play at number 4, Bama at 3, LSU, of course, square off this weekend in Tuscaloosa, and Ohio State, the most dominant and complete team going weeks through 1 through 8. Start of the game through the end of the game, offense, defense, special teams, the most complete team, and they were rewarded for that with a number 1 ranking. All right, have at it. Call in 860-325-3687, and I'll certainly give you my thoughts as let's see the discrepancies between what I have and what the committee has. I've got LSU at number 1, Ohio State 2, Penn State at 3, so I certainly am right in line with the committee in regards to the Penn State value of their schedule and how dominant they've been most of the time. Pitt was the biggest scare that they've had, but Pitt right now stands at, I believe, 6-3. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
What's up, Marcus DeAndre? How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Man, congratulations on Ohio State being ranked number 1 in the first poll. What's it called? The playoff poll, right? That will go by.
It's the playoff rankings. It is not a poll. Nobody's being polled. They are just rankings.
Okay, rankings.
They're rankings, DeAndre, and there's nothing to be congratulatory about. There's still 4 games and a conference championship game left to be played.
Yeah. I know. But still, but congratulations, though. I don't know why, but, congratulations.
Quick trivia here, and for everybody out there, DeAndre, do you recall who the very first number 1 team in the playoff rankings were in 2014? Mississippi State. Who was number 3 in that ranking?
Florida State.
We also had what I was getting to is we had 3 SEC teams, and none of them came anywhere close to the playoffs, with Mississippi State, Ole Miss, and Texas A&M.
You know what, Mark, and this is just the honest truth.
Yeah.
The problem I have with the rankings the rankings, right? The problem I have with it, why is Minnesota and Baylor ranked behind 2 lost teams? That's what I have a problem with. We all knew that Ohio State or LSU is going to be number 1. I don't really agree with Penn State, Alabama above Penn State. But like you said, this is just the first rankings. But I have an issue with that because if you're undefeated, you're undefeated. Now, if you had a 1-loss team like Oregon and Utah in front of them, I had no issue with that. But we had 2 losses. To me, you should be pushed to the background. And I know that everybody said, well, Minnesota hasn't played anybody yet. And they got a couple hard games coming up, and they was close to losing early in the year. But they should be higher than those teams that have 2 losses, though. That's my issue. I mean, and there's no way we can control that, but that's my issue, though.
So I somewhat agree with you. I certainly have Minnesota much higher than the committee does. I've got them at number 10. I've got Baylor at 11, actually, because I think Minnesota's been playing in a better schedule. But anyway, so I fall in line with you to a certain extent, but the committee is trying to reward the schedule and the scheduling of good teams, right, especially in the non-conference.
Right. Okay, that's fine.
And it should play out. It should play out. Minnesota's schedule gets awfully tough in a hurry. They have 3 very difficult games coming.
Yeah, it's Wisconsin, Iowa, and Penn State starting this weekend.
Yes.
Everybody's on this big game day trip. I think game day, if everybody wants them to go there, they already been at LSU, Alabama. Give us a new site. Go to Minnesota. Be up in the cold a little bit. That's what I think should happen. But
that would be fun.
Other than that, I really don't have a problem with the rankings. We all saw it coming. Mainly, they want Ohio State, Penn State to play. Alabama, LSU, they're going to let them knock each other off. Clemson's going to be ranked in the top 4 when it's all said and done, because these other teams got to play each other. And outside of maybe Wake Forest, the way NC State is looking, they're not that good. Did you see my YouTube on the history of the Textile Bowl? If you like Clemson football, go check that out, because, NC State has beaten Clemson when Clemson has been really good, 2007, 1986. And I'll talk about the history of that game. and they came close like 2 or 3 times in the last 5-year period. So, so all y'all that want to know the history of the Textile Bowl, go check that on my channel.
Very cool.
But yeah, so Clemson doesn't have anybody going to challenge them. South Carolina might put up some type of fight because that's a big rivalry game. Well, Clemson ain't going to have anybody that's going to challenge them. They're going to move up and make the playoffs, and we all know that was going to happen. All of this depends on what site they're going to play at and what color uniforms they're going to wear. Where are the sites this year? The Fiesta Bowl and where else?
I really don't know off the top of my head. We'll just stick to the rankings here, and we'll worry where they're playing and what uniforms they're going to wear a little bit later. I don't know. I typically don't keep up with that until it's right in front of me.
Yeah, but Mark, I'll give some other people a chance to call in. But yo, man, keep on doing a great show. And like I said, I don't have too many problems with the issue outside of that. I think Minnesota and Baylor should be ranked higher than Auburn and a couple of those other teams that lost to. Florida, I think, lost to. They should be ranked higher. That's about it. So they're going to play themselves out eventually.
Absolutely.
You have a great night.
All right, DeAndre.
And I'm going to keep on listening to the show.
Thank you so much for the support. I appreciate it. Our man DeAndre, big Clemson fan, ACC supporter, and of course the Tigers come in at number 5, which for other teams and other situations might be an issue or a challenge or a concern, but not in Clemson's situation where they have a clear path to win the ACC. Wake Forest, most likely their most difficult game, possibly South Carolina. I was asked that question the other day. I do think that Wake Forest is a more consistent team than South Carolina, but South Carolina has a puncher's chance that they showed at Georgia. So South Carolina with better top-end talent than Wake Forest. I don't know where the South Carolina game is. Wake has to go to Clemson. So those are the only possibilities on Clemson's schedule, of course, in addition to the ACC championship game. If you're looking for Clemson to possibly get upset, it seems impossible. But remember, there was a North Carolina game this year. Also, remember, there was a Pitt game in 2016 that did knock them out of the playoff, but that type of result would knock them out of the playoff most likely this year. So let's not mark Clemson in the playoff. Yes, by far they are the odds-on favorite, and by far they have the best winning percentage or the best chance or probability of making the playoff over than anybody else in the country. But Clemson can't be completely ushered in right now. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
Hey, Mark, it's Matt.
Hey, Matt. How are you?
Good. How about you?
I'm good. What's going on?
Who do you think is the most overrated team in this poll so far and the most underrated team in this poll so far?
All right. The most overrated team, I believe, off the top as I run it down, not a lot of people are going to agree with me, but I think the name Oklahoma certainly gets a bunch of respect. And I don't know who Oklahoma has really beaten this season.
That's fair.
I see teams behind Oklahoma that have much better resumes than Oklahoma. They haven't played anybody to beat anyone. Their best win still Texas, and Texas continues to falter. I'm trying to think off the top of my head, anybody else that Oklahoma has beaten. They have yet to play Baylor. They have yet to play Iowa State. I don't believe they played TCU yet. They played nobody in the non-conference. UCLA might have been their best win. UCLA or Houston, there you go. Oklahoma's too high at 9 for me. I think that's an eye test, a ranking right there. And the low end is Minnesota. They jump out at me automatically that Minnesota is way too low at 17. I understand the schedule's weak, but they're undefeated. And it's going to play out certainly for Minnesota. Now, the Oklahoma ranking certainly is going to play into, if they continue to win, whether you consider Oklahoma to be rated too high or too low. That's going to mean a whole bunch. The Minnesota ranking, of course, is going to be earned, and they could skyrocket in the next 3 weeks with who they have to play.
Okay, and also, I'm going to throw out a scenario. Penn State, their only loss is Ohio State. Alabama, their only loss is LSU. and then Oregon, their only loss is Auburn. Who gets in the college football playoff if that's for a final spot?
If that's for a final spot, and Oregon is the
Yeah.
Pac-12 champion,
Yeah.
then I put in Oregon. What will the committee do? Well, Penn State will probably have the best schedule. They'll have the best strength of schedule, I would guess, amongst those three teams. Alabama won't have much to stand on, considering Auburn and Texas A&M and LSU are going to be their three best games, and they would have lost to LSU. So their two best wins are going to be Texas A&M and Auburn, where Penn State's going to have a line of Minnesota, Iowa, Michigan, Ohio State, Pitt. But I go Oregon with a Pac-12 championship, and they're going to have a Utah win under their belt to add to Washington State, and USC, that I know are pretty marginal wins at this point, but they're fairly solid wins. So I'm a conference champion guy, but I would think that Penn State has the best resume.
Yeah, I favor conference champions, but Penn State, that resume, I feel like would be too hard to overlook.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at, the Big Ten is a lot better. I mean, not a lot better than the Pac-12 this year. I'd say it's better, but it's not a lot better. Like I thought at the beginning of the season, the Pac-12 does look better than I thought they'd be. But Penn State would have wins over Minnesota, Michigan. Let's see,
Iowa.
Do they play Wisconsin? No, they don't play Wisconsin.
They beat Iowa.
Yeah, so that's three
Pitt.
really good wins, and I don't know. I think I'd put Penn State. I do agree, though. If Alabama loses this weekend, I don't think they should be in.
Yeah, I don't either. I don't see how they would possibly get in. Well, in a reasonable situation with reasonable people deciding it, I don't know how they could possibly get in, unless there's chaos everywhere, of course. But this would be the end of their season. They just don't have the resume. LSU's in a much better position, having played Texas and Florida, than Alabama, and then having the loss be on the road at Alabama versus Alabama losing at home, and having Duke as its best non-conference game, and playing Kentucky, playing Tennessee and South Carolina in the SEC Eastern Division.
I agree.
It's just not strong.
And the thing is, as a Texas fan, I'm wishing this happens. I don't think it will, but if we win out, that will probably put us back in the top 12, and that will help out LSU and Oklahoma's resume.
So the Alabama scenario in 2017 was very similar. They didn't win the SEC West. They lost to Auburn. I can't remember off the top of my head who they played in the SEC East that year. Of course, they played Tennessee, as they always do. I think their other game was against Vanderbilt. And then they had a non-conference win that was judged. This was the dividing line, was they beat Florida State in week 1. Florida State was ranked number 3 in the country, but they finished 6-6. So some people considered that to be a marginal win. Other people considered it to be a really good win. And Alabama still made the playoff.
Yeah, their schedule that year, I'm looking at it right now. They had Vandy, Ole Miss, A&M, Arkansas, Tennessee, LSU, Mississippi State, Auburn. Where's the regular season SEC schedule?
I think their two best wins were Mississippi State and LSU, finished in the top 15.
Yeah, 18 and 19.
Okay.
Who made the college football playoff that year? I'm trying to remember.
That was Alabama beat Georgia in the championship game. The other two teams were Oklahoma and Clemson.
Okay. And then, obviously, I called, 2 days before Willie Taggart got fired, so we were both wrong on that. I thought if he made it to 6-6, he'd be fine, but after hearing all the stories that came out, how boosters were, jumping at it, and they actually raised $20 million, that was pretty crazy to me.
Yep, money speaks.
Yeah, yes, it does. And do you think, obviously Bob Stoops, I didn't believe that when they first said it. Do you think his brother's got a shot at the job?
Well, the comment I made today in posting a video where we had James Coleman on, a former Florida State player, is that there is much speculation, even among the major services, is that Florida State is going to name a head coach this week.
Whoa.
And if they name a head coach this week, that head coach is not currently employed.
Oh, okay. So maybe it could be Bob Stoops. That really surprised me, though.
Yeah, if he would have told me 2 weeks ago Willie Taggart's going to get fired, I would say okay. And then who's the successor going to be? Bob Stoops. I would have thought, oh my goodness, I wouldn't even come up with that name.
Yeah, he would have made a lot of money betting on Vegas with that.
For
And
sure.
who else could it be if they're saying they're not employed? I'm trying to think who else could
Well,
it be.
I'm saying that. I'm speculating that a coach, when has a head coach or a coordinator ever left a job mid-season to take a head coaching job?
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I don't think that would happen. That would be way too crazy for me. Unless they threw like $10 million a year at someone, I don't see that happening.
So, and the other situation is that by pulling the plug on Willie Taggart this soon, they're leaving a program in limbo, and to be able to name a head coach is going to help recruiting, as opposed to letting Willie finish the season. They get to game 12, they fire him along with everybody else being fired on that Monday after the season ends. And that's typically how it happens, because then um, who else is available, and then you start going after coaches. But to go after coaches who are still employed and coaching games, the desirable ones are still coaching meaningful games. So it points to me to Bob Stoops.
Yeah, or I was just thinking there is one guy I could see doing it because he's been a mess ever since he started head coaching. Lane Kiffin, I could see quitting his job and going to Florida State right away.
Bingo.
But yeah, I think part of the reason he also got fired is early signing period. That totally skipped my mind, but that gives you a chance to still stay with those recruits. I think that had a big. I think that had a lot to do with it.
Yep. Yeah, that's going to change that strategy to a certain extent, and maybe this is the first of many of these firings. Not that coaches haven't been fired mid-season, but this is going to prompt administrations and boosters and alumni to pull the trigger sooner because of the December signing period rather than February. Very true.
Okay, that'll do it for my call. Thanks for taking it.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it. Have a good one.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Of course, we've got the college football playoff rankings, and they seem to be fairly uniform, but there are some rankings that are a bit peculiar. Not that they're inaccurate or don't have some logic behind them, but they're certainly in question. Hey, it's Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
Hey, sir. This is Aaron Powers, longtime fan, sir. Obviously a big Buckeye fan tonight. I just wanted to get your thoughts on it. I really like the fact that we're number one, but at the same time, I feel like LSU has played a much better strength of schedule as far as, Florida. Excuse me. I just wanted to get your thoughts on it, and then I'm kind of happy that teams like Clemson are kind of getting, I don't want to use the word like punished for the way they've played against like North Carolina and whatnot. But like I said, I just want to get your opinion on what you think.
Yeah, so what I think is that the committee is letting us know that Ohio State's been dominant. The strength of schedule, I would love to do, and maybe I will do this at some point later tonight, is take the LSU schedule versus the Ohio State schedule and rank the schedules and take the best team and then the second best team and third and match them up to determine, based on just logic and reasoning and looking at the two schedules, who has the better schedule, because it's assumed by me that LSU is the better schedule. When you think about facing Auburn and Florida in particular, and then a Texas game out of conference on the road, it appears to be a better schedule, and I've rewarded it in my rankings the entire season. But they mentioned on the broadcast tonight that based on strength of schedule, those metrics, Ohio State has a more difficult schedule than LSU.
Totally agree with you, sir. Also, another thing, I had a little bit of an issue when they started referring to Notre Dame as a quality win for Georgia, where they've shown consistently all year to where I don't believe they should be ranked as a quality win. I feel like they're ranked a little too high. I don't know. I'm a little curious how that would all play out the way Georgia's strength of schedule has been, and let's say, I'm trying to think, as far as that goes, and let's say Oregon's a Pac-12 champion, how that would kind of all play out.
Yeah, so there are varying degrees of quality wins. So I don't believe in the quality win term being just laid out there as either that's a quality win or it's a not a quality win. Obviously, there are varying degrees. At the high end, South Carolina and Auburn would have the most quality wins that I can think of right off the top of my head in the nation. Auburn beat Oregon, and South Carolina beat Georgia. The teams that beat Florida would have the best quality wins. Those seem to be the best quality wins, so they're more quality than the teams that beat Iowa or Oklahoma State, but those are still quality wins, but to a lesser degree. So I'm not one to judge and say that's a quality win, and there are only quality wins or not quality wins. There are varying degrees of quality wins. If somebody beats Ohio State here in the next few weeks, that sounds like a quality win. That's going to be the nth degree quality win. Now, when you mention who's the team that you mentioned, Notre Dame is not a quality win, it would come out of my mouth that Notre Dame was a quality win, but it's nowhere close to what it looked like it was 4 or 5 weeks ago. So
versus now.
How good is Notre Dame? Well, you bring up a good point because they're 6-2, and they've lost to two really good football teams in Michigan and Georgia. But who has Notre Dame beaten? Let's see. They beat Virginia. They beat Virginia Tech. I'm thinking those are the two best wins that they have on their resume right now. So Notre Dame hasn't really shown us anything in regards to wins. They've beaten Louisville, New Mexico, Virginia, Bowling Green, USC, and Virginia Tech. Yes, so Virginia is probably their best win, and then Virginia Tech. So they've beaten two teams that are roughly anywhere from 30th to 40th in the nation.
Do you think if Notre Dame would continuously or start to stumble, would kind of like how we're seeing with Oklahoma, how Texas really isn't a more quality win? I hate using that word.
Yep.
But do you think that would affect Georgia in the long run, depending on how the SEC title game would, come about?
So if that was another team and it wasn't at Georgia that beat, let's say it was Virginia. Let's say Virginia beat Notre Dame, and we were questioning how good Virginia is. Well, they would be very reliant on that win against Notre Dame, and Notre Dame being better. Oregon's going to be reliant on the Auburn win. If Auburn collapses and they finish 7-5 or 8-4, that's not going to look nearly as good for Oregon, and it's going to be damaging to Oregon because they're going to be compared against, let's say, an Oklahoma or a Baylor as a Big 12 champion. But Georgia is going to have so many quality wins. Either they're going to lose and be completely out of it and a non-factor, or Georgia's going to rack up wins against, again, Notre Dame, Florida, Texas A&M, Auburn, and an SEC championship game. That's going to be inconsequential how good Notre Dame is to Georgia if they win the SEC championship. And if they don't win the SEC championship, they're out of it anyway.
Sure. Very true. All right, so that's all I had, and I appreciate your time, sir.
Hey, thank you so much for the call. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark.
Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. This is what we do each and every day, all year, not just during college football playoff time and when the games are being played. All the time. We talk college football. I appreciate the contributions to the super chat from Taz Money 870. Thank you so much. Love the channel. Keep it up. And Nice Guy TV. That's DeAndre pulling through for us. Calls coming in. We appreciate everybody on the line. We got about 200 on the line right now. All right, it's Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. I'm needing water, so please talk away. Who's on the line?
Hey, Mark, it's McD Sports 4. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing just fine.
I did.
Unfortunately, I thought that I was going to get away with the sickness, but it came back.
Uh-oh.
And I'm pretty sick right now. But
Plenty of fluid, sir.
yep. But I basically call up about what we saw here in the past hour. Obviously, it's college football playoff rankings. I think I had 3 questions about the rankings, and my first question was, and we all know that they were going to favor the SEC, but how much were they going to favor the SEC? And I thought they favored the SEC a lot. I would not have Florida at 10, and I would not have Auburn at 11. I think those 2 teams are too high.
Okay.
My second question was, what were they going to do with Baylor and Minnesota? And I know I get on Minnesota sometimes saying how they have a weak resume and everything. They're undefeated. I will make an argument that they are vastly underrated in this poll, and I think at minimum they should be at like 13.
So this is a landmark day. We've got McD Sports 4 calling in, and he's actually sticking up for defending Minnesota football. Never thought it would happen.
Well, I mean, I'm not biased, and I believe in fairness, and I think Minnesota is at 17 is laughable. I really do.
I do too.
They're running out all their teams. Now, granted, their best win is against the Maryland Terps, but overall, Minnesota, I mean, they get Penn State this week. If they can beat Penn State, hopefully they move them into the top, like, at least 12. But I think they're really disrespecting Minnesota. I think at minimum they got to be in the top 15. I think Kansas State is being vastly overrated. All they did was beat Oklahoma, Kansas State. If you look at Kansas State's resume here, which I'm getting up here in a second, they lost to Oklahoma State, who's ranked, who I think shouldn't be ranked, and he lost to Baylor. Granted, they did beat Kansas, TCU, Oklahoma, Mississippi State, Nicholas State, and Bowling Green, but I think they're vastly overrated as well. I mean, both of their losses, one of them being the Baylor loss, is kind of embarrassing. So I think Kansas State's overrated. I think the group of 5 is a bit underrated. I mean, Cincinnati is your highest group of 5 team at 20. And personally, I think that they should be a bit higher. Their only loss is 42-0 to Ohio State, and I don't like them getting shut out. But I do think they should at least be like probably 16 or 17. So that's kind of my main thoughts first looking at this top 25.
Yeah, we'll never know, but it would be interesting to know if Cincinnati would have been somewhat competitive in that Ohio State game, how much they would have been credited for, let's say, losing by 14 or 17 points and not 42-0.
Yeah. One thing that I do agree with, or some people disagree with, and in my rankings, I had Clemson ahead of Penn State, but I'm fine with Penn State ahead of Clemson based on the resumes.
That's where I've got them.
I mean, I had Clemson 4, Penn State 5, but I'm okay with it, with that being flip-flopped. I think LSU should be number 1, though, personally. Ohio State, I do think it's the best team in college football, but if you look at the resumes, I think LSU does have a better resume.
What's interesting about that, McD Sports, is that I have LSU at number 1. I've had them number 1 for quite some time, and I've got Ohio State number 2. And it appears off the top of your head, as it does mine, that with Florida, Auburn, and Texas on the schedule, that LSU has played a much better schedule than Ohio State. Their top-end games have been, Wisconsin, Indiana, Cincinnati, maybe Michigan State. But did you hear the broadcast tonight? Ohio State has a better strength of schedule than LSU, statistically. I don't necessarily buy it, but they do.
Really? I mean,
that's what they said. That's what they said. That's what they said in the broadcast tonight.
Well, first of all, I know you work for the company, but I don't like there's 2 people in the middle personally. But I'm just going to reserve my thoughts on that.
Yeah, I have to too.
But I mean, that surprises me because I look at Ohio State. They didn't play a Power 5 team. Now, granted, they did play Cincinnati. I believe they played FAU, who's a decent team in the Conference USA. And who else did they play?
Non-conference?
They did play in the Out Conference this season.
Miami of Ohio. Ohio State's non-conference schedule was abysmal.
I mean, they did beat Cincinnati 42-0. He's ranked number 20. So, I mean, it's not terrible in my opinion. LSU Out Conference, granted, I know they played a nobody, I think, in Northwestern State, an FCS opponent. But they had Utah State, Georgia Southern, who just went ahead and beat Appalachian State, who would have been in this rankings. I'm pretty sure they didn't lose. Georgia, they beat them 55-3. So, I mean, I think LSU, they definitely have a good non-conference schedule. They beat Florida. They went ahead and beat Auburn. I mean, if they beat Alabama, I think they gotta be the number 1 team. I just think that just off the resume. So, I disagree with that. I also disagree with this rankings. I disagree with Oklahoma State in the rankings at all. I don't think they should be in the rankings.
They're in my rankings, so I'm good with it. You know what's funny here is if anybody would have been listening to me, and maybe people were because I haven't advanced the live chat far enough to be able to see if anybody responded. I was actually reading my rankings from 2 weeks ago. So I was wondering when I got done with that, and then I was like, Florida, why do I have Florida that high? Oh, these are the rankings from 2 weeks ago. So people should have been blasting me on this, but and then I was wondering why I even kept this sheet. It's because I've got a flight itinerary on it. So there you go.
Yeah. Well, I have one question for you, not actually involving your rankings that I've seen. Why do you have Texas at 23?
Because I believe they've got the 23rd best resume in the country.
Like, what makes you think that?
Because they took LSU to the wire at home. They beat Oklahoma State, who the College Football Playoff Selection Committee has ranked rather highly, and Texas beat them by 6? I'm trying to go off the top of my head. Texas. They lost to Oklahoma in a close game by a touchdown. They did lose to TCU. That's not a good loss, but TCU is not awful. It's not a horrible loss, but they did lose to TCU. And Texas's other loss was against. They haven't played Baylor yet. Who else did they lose to?
They have 3 losses.
TCU, Oklahoma, and LSU. There you go. There's their 3 losses. They've lost to 2. According to the playoff committee, they've lost to 2 of the top 8 teams in the country in close games.
I mean, I guess you have an argument there. I still can't get over the fact over that Kansas game, though. I think that's the problem I have with Texas. I just can't get over that.
They did win the game.
They did win the game, but that game should not be 50-48.
No, it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be, but it's one time. And Clemson got that one time, and I know North Carolina is much better than Kansas, but if it would have happened over and over and over, I think Ohio State took some hits last year because that type of game jumped up on them, in addition to the Purdue loss, of course, but they struggled against Nebraska. They struggled against Maryland. They had a few of those. Texas has 1. And I'm not comparing Texas because they're not competing for a national championship this year, but I'm just defending my ranking at 23, I believe.
And speaking about Texas, I want to give a quick shout out to Deep Rod. I have not seen him in probably a month, so I'm hoping he comes back because I like hearing about the recruiting of Texas and all that. So I hope he comes back. I hope he just doesn't stay away because Texas didn't hit his expectations. But that's all I really have, Mark. I mean, I can nitpick all I want on this. SMU at 25, I kind of disagree with, but I mean, at this point, I'm kind of just nitpicking. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens here down the pike throughout the month. I'll call back on Saturday after my Terps lose to your Buckeyes. I do think we covered that spread, though. However, I think it's like 44 points last time I checked. I do think we cover that.
Wow.
I don't think Ohio State covers that 44, but we will lose probably by 4 touchdowns. So that's my quick 2 cents in that game.
All right,
Thank you for
McD.
my call, Mark.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Go Terps.
All right. I make the explanation from time to time about what comments I'm able to take to the live chat. So if you're having a private conversation with somebody, that's great. Go right ahead. It's not private, of course, but it's between you two. I'm not going to take those comments because they really don't make much sense. So I take those type of comments that are for the universe, and I post those on the screen. Also, keep in mind that I was only at 10:06. So it is currently about 10:38 Eastern time, and I was only at 10:06 in the comments, and I was trying to catch up, and something advanced all the way up to 10:30. So if you made a comment between 10:06 and 10:30 and would like to see it on the screen, I'm sorry, but I can't do anything about it. It's the application I use to present the various comments on screen. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
Hey, Mark, this is Eli.
Eli, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing just fine.
So, Mark, there's a lot of disagreements I had with the rankings. Like I did my rankings before the AP poll came out, so I wouldn't be influenced at it. And my rankings were like completely different from pretty much everyone else's.
Okay, in what way?
Well, let's see. I'll just read real quickly what my top 25 is. I have number 1 at LSU, 2 Ohio State, 3 Alabama, 4 Penn State. Number 5 is Clemson. Number 6, I have Baylor. 7, Minnesota. 8, I have Oregon. 9, Georgia. Number 10 at Memphis. 11, Oklahoma. 12, Utah. 13, I have Florida. 14, Auburn.
Okay, why don't we stop right there? Just because it's too much to digest. Let's stick with the contenders right there. You took us up to 14. So the first thing that jumps out at me is you've got Minnesota all the way up to at number 7. I believe I've got Minnesota. I don't have my rankings in front of me. I got these old rankings. But anyway, I believe I've got Minnesota at 9 or 10. And you've got them at 7. So you are rewarding just strictly a record, is what you're telling us.
Like Bill Parcells used to say, you are what your record says you are.
Okay.
So, I mean, I was thinking that until they lose the game, once they lose probably to Penn State, I would probably drop them down several notches. But I think you should rank the unbeaten.
Okay, so if you're going to take that same tact all the way through, then you need to be consistent. So you're going to rank all the 0-loss teams first, then you rank all the 1-loss teams next, and then all the 2 losses, and then all the 3 losses, and you keep them in order.
Well, once they've lost the game, I then start to maybe mix them up a little bit with the 2-loss teams because if you haven't lost the game yet, then you get the benefit of the doubt. But once you've at least lost the game, then it takes more into factor. Like like if it was a really bad loss, like Appalachian State losing to Georgia Southern was much worse than, say, I don't know, maybe Memphis losing to Temple or Oklahoma losing to Kansas State.
Well, I enjoy playing devil's advocate, so I'm going to do it right there just to point out again that what is magical about losing 0 games versus 1 game and not 1 game versus 2 games. If you're going to take that approach to the 0-loss teams versus the 1-loss teams, why wouldn't you take exactly the same approach ranking the 1s versus the 2-loss teams and the 2s versus the 3s?
I guess because if you lost 0 games, it's like technically you have no blemishes at all in your record, so it's like you deserve every benefit of the doubt. I guess that's what my argument is. And then once they lose the game, I tend to get a little bit more liberal. I mean, I tend to most of the time favor 1 loss over 2 loss, but in some cases, like Auburn's a great 2-loss team because and then Florida also would probably be a real good 2-loss team versus maybe they lose to 1 really bad team. You know, for example, that's when it kind of I get a bit more. I loosen up a lot.
Okay. So as we go down the rankings, then I notice that Florida and Auburn are awfully low compared to everybody else's rankings.
Yeah. I mean, the 2 losses kind of does make it somewhat like, even though they are pretty good losses, like I was kind of having trouble with it, but I thought that was kind of appropriate. I mean, I have them better than any other 2-loss teams.
Okay.
because I mean, at 15 I have Wisconsin, 16 Michigan. Let's see, number 17 is Cincinnati. I actually probably should have put them higher. 18 I had Kansas State, that's Notre Dame, Wake Forest, and then to round out 21 to 25 is SMU, Navy, San Diego State, Boise State, and the Air Force.
All right, very much. Appreciate the call there. Anything else?
So, yeah, well, I just wanted to ask you about, like, what do you think about Nebraska with Scott Frost? Like, I know that Willie Taggart was fired, and Scott Frost has pretty much done about the same thing with Nebraska that Willie Taggart's done with Florida State. It's kind of like, I mean, I'm not going to say that Willie Taggart did a good job at all. I think he deserved to be fired, but I'm kind of wondering if maybe, I mean, Nebraska has really, they've been probably one of the biggest disappointments all year. Like,
Sure.
kind of makes you wonder if Scott Frost should be on the chopping block because, I mean, because think about the expectations. A lot of people had Nebraska winning the Big Ten West and winning 9 or 10 games, and now it looks like they might not even make a bowl game. I mean, that's a bad look, in my opinion.
Well, it's a bad look, especially since he was brought in as a savior, and he was brought in after lifting UCF to an undefeated season. And he's coaching at one of the blue bloods in college football, although it's been down for close to 20 years. So the differentiation I'm going to make between Scott Frost's performance and Willie Taggart's performance is, number one, that Scott Frost did not take over a roster that was loaded with top 10 to 15 talent. He took over recruited classes that built that roster, that made up the roster that was more in the 30 to 35 range. So he doesn't have nearly the recruited talent on his roster than Willie Taggart did at Florida State, number one. Number two, once Nebraska got off to a rough start last year, they were much more competitive in games than Willie Taggart's Florida State teams. Nebraska routinely competed against really good teams down the stretch last year. And even though they're losing these games this year, they're not getting annihilated by anyone. Generally, they got annihilated by Michigan last year.
Yeah, no, I mean, Nebraska, I mean, they lost to a mediocre Purdue team, and I think Minnesota annihilated them. I mean, that wasn't even close.
Last year. Oh, this year. Yeah,
okay.
they lost 30. Yes, they lost 34-7 this year. Correct. They lost to Minnesota 34-7. They were not playing with Adrian Martinez in that game. I just don't think that the talent is extremely comparable right now. And I think that Nebraska has been much more competitive and looks, sure, they're making dumb mistakes and they're losing games at the wire, but they're more competitive with less talent, and they just look better prepared and more inspired. Now, if this continues, certainly if we're sitting here in year 3 or year 4 of Scott Frost and they're still losing by 3 or 4 points to Purdue and those type of teams, then that's not why they hired him. But I'm not anywhere close to pulling the plug on Scott Frost.
Yeah, but what was with all the hype in the preseason? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Like, why were so many people picking them to do so well? I mean, it just kind of makes me laugh that there was so much hype for what? Nothing.
So it's a great point that you make, is because most of the people that make predictions, and I'll raise my hand here for a second, even though I'll differentiate it as well. Most of the people that make predictions look at a few things. They look at your quarterback, they look at your head coach, and just kind of the vibe or the feel. And that was that Scott Frost came in and worked miracles at UCF, came to Nebraska. It's a great story because that's where he played football. That's where he won a national championship. And he had a great quarterback to work with, or a great high ceiling quarterback to work with in Adrian Martinez. And so it's a feel-good story. It looks good. Nebraska, who can get them back to the elite of college football? Well, Scott Frost would be the guy to do it. He did that at UCF. Why can't he do it at Nebraska? And they're not looking at the depth issues, the issues on the roster. Nobody talks about offensive line play, defensive line play. They look at quarterbacks and coaches and the storyline, and it looked to be like a fit. and especially the way they played down the stretch. They took Ohio State to one possession game. They took Iowa to the last play of the game. They looked much better in November than they did the rest of the season, and people just anticipated that that was going to continue.
Okay, so you think that if year 3 they're still looking mediocre, that they might eventually decide to fire him?
Oh, eventually.
Barely struggles to.
If we're sitting here in year 6 and he's going 5-7, yeah, he's going to get fired eventually. Sure.
Yeah, because I just feel at some point, even if he took over a rough situation, at some point it's like you got to produce. You got your recruiting class, and it's time to actually be better than just mediocrity.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for the call, man. I appreciate it.
All right, thanks for taking it. Bye.
Press 1 to start the call.
All right.
The call will start at the beep.
One of my off-season projects is to get rid of this. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
Good evening. This is Comic Dude 45. How are you today?
I'm doing great. What's going on?
Not much. Just all the rankings. OSU's number 1. Pride.
Ohio State's number 1? Yep. Do you have any disagreement with the rankings?
Not really. LSU and OSU are more elite teams, but LSU did have their defensive weaknesses to start the season. I'm number 1. Lost yet.
You're breaking up a little bit on this. Give that another try.
I said Clemson should be number 1 because they haven't lost yet, even though they're what they were last year.
So you think we should be ranking teams based on what they did last year?
Well, so the false narrative that you play the ranking.
Let's give it one more shot. You're breaking up, and I'll have to let you go. Maybe you can try to call back and see if it clears up. But give it one more go here.
All right. I think Clemson should be number 1. I don't like the idea. It creates a false narrative, and teams need to blow out the nobodies they play in the rankings. It sickens me, honestly.
Well, Clemson has generally blown everyone out, excluding North Carolina.
Yeah. But still, it's still created, but too as a result. That's what I'm mad about.
So you think Clemson should be ranked where?
Still number 1 until they lose.
So again, you're going to carry over last season's results to this season.
Yeah, because 15, fleet touch, so 15 in a season, changes, but they shouldn't be punished just because they lose someone.
Well, I don't know that they're being punished. They're just being evaluated. Just like everybody else. It's a new season. It's not heavyweight boxing where we've got a champion who stays champion until he gets knocked out or beaten. We're starting a whole new season.
Okay, I appreciate the mentality. It is a fresh breath of fresh air, but just don't you have to blow them out just to it's you don't blow out let's say Clemson only beat Kansas by 1 point.
Mm-hmm.
Why should they drop in the rankings? They won.
Well, the issue
they might not have looked as good.
The issue is that it's college football and it's not the NFL or another professional sport where we don't care in the NFL who blows anybody out. It has nothing to do with it because we have objective standings that determine who goes to the playoffs. But in college football, we've got too many teams and they don't play each other. So there has to be an evaluation of how good they're playing, how good the performance is. Why wouldn't Minnesota be ranked ahead of Clemson then, based on your criteria? Why wouldn't all that? What differentiates 0-loss teams if we're not evaluating their performance? I agree with you that in a perfect world, that would be awesome, that we don't even have to rank teams. We just have standings, and you win games and you lose games, and the standings determine who goes to the playoff. But that's not the world we live in. We have to evaluate the teams.
Okay, then maybe it's like also I like the idea of like how good the teams you play have you beaten. Like, okay, fine. Look, let's say if like Clemson was undefeated, but they have a win over LSU, and Minnesota's undefeated, but they have a win over, let's say, Miami of Ohio. I think Clemson should be higher, regardless of.
Well, it's no fault of Clemson's, but they have not played the schedule that some of the teams that they're being compared to have.
I still see that argument, but still I feel like it's fair to like drop them like that. However,
I'm sorry, we've lost you. Why don't you give it another go and call us back?
All right, have a good night.
Thank you so much. All right, Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, breaking down the college football playoff rankings. I appreciate the calls and so forth, and so many things go through my mind during these calls that I want to talk about once I get off the phone, and then I completely forget what I was going to talk about and address. What I don't like, well, make a list. What I don't like about this defending national champion undefeated team carryover approach is that it basically doesn't make sense because that's a different team. We've got Clemson players from the 2018 team that are playing in the NFL right now. It's not the same team. It's a different team to some degree. Some of the players, obviously, that played in 2018 are still playing for Clemson, still the same coaching staff and the same head coach. But it's largely a different team. And regardless, even if everybody brought back the same exact teams, it's a different season. So if we're going to give recognition and a spot, an automatic spot to a national championship team from last year that continues to win, why wouldn't we do that with every other team? Why wouldn't the number 17 team in the country last year, as long as they roughly did the same thing, we would rank them number 17? Why wouldn't we take that same approach to everybody? Unfortunately for Clemson, unfortunately for any team that plays in a weak conference, they can't control their conference. They can't control that Florida State and NC State and Miami aren't anywhere close to what they've been in the past, and Louisville. They can't control that. They can only control the non-conference schedule, and then once they schedule it, they can't control how good those teams are. So Clemson, by scheduling South Carolina on a regular basis, of course, it's a rivalry game, and scheduling Texas A&M home to home the last 2 years, and before that it was Auburn. They schedule tough games. Now, Texas A&M has not been as good as we expected them. Can Clemson control that? No, but we still have to evaluate the schedule, and the schedule is just not good. It shouldn't hurt Clemson as long as they go undefeated, but they are being held to a higher standard because they play in a bad conference than maybe some other teams who will win, let's say the Big Ten or the SEC with one loss, possibly, and will get an automatic entry into the college football playoff, as opposed to Clemson. If they lose, let's say they stumble against Wake Forest or against South Carolina, then they are going to need a whole lot of help to make the college football playoff. That's just the way it is. It's not their fault, but we have to evaluate the teams. Was it UCF's fault that they play in the group of five? No, they won all their games. And they actually beat a number of Power 5 teams over the last few years, like Pitt, like, of course, Auburn in the Peach Bowl, but in the regular season, like Pitt and like North Carolina, come to mind off the top of my head. All right. Somebody contributed to the super chat. I appreciate that. I'm going to find who it is. Again, understand my application doesn't match YouTube exactly. You would have to see it to understand. All right, we got a call coming in. All right, talking more college football playoff rankings. Week 1, Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
Hello, this is Sean.
Hey, Sean.
I called last year when Ohio State lost to Purdue and made the comment that these things just keep happening under Urban Meyer. That seem to have some flaws. It's pretty interesting, the ranking, considering I thought when they put Penn State number 4 that they were going to put LSU at number 1, just because of the trend of winning against the likes of Florida and Auburn, and then also beating Texas in the beginning of the season was pretty impressive. But I mean, as far as the eyeball test, I think it's kind of interesting that it's like they use the eyeball test for some teams, and then for some teams they use strength of schedule, and then it doesn't make sense to me how Texas A&M is ranked where they are. I think that's some sort of SEC bias. And then Minnesota seems a little bit too low. And also, I would say UC is a little bit too low also, just from what I can see from what they put out. And then last week, I actually attended the Notre Dame game. I'm a Buckeye fan, so I kind of have a little bit of a neutral perspective on the game and on that team. And to be honest, I'm a little bit surprised that Georgia didn't win by a bigger margin. So it makes me wonder about Georgia. That's kind of my. It seems like Notre Dame has a lot of flaws in Vatek. Their quarterback situation is not very good. They have a really big guy at quarterback, but he really can't do much, anything great. He does his running, he's okay. But passing, I would say he's subpar. I mean, passing level is almost like a freshman slash. He just seems like a low-level passing quarterback for a college football team. I've seen high school quarterbacks with better passing ability, but that's just my 2 cents. What do you got to say about that, Mark? And I love your show, by the way.
I appreciate the call.
Also,
Yep.
Yeah. One other quick shout out, and then I'll listen before I make any other comments. I really like the guy that does the Michigan podcast. He does a great job, and he seems super funny, and he really takes the losses to heart, and it's pretty fun to watch him do that show, and then also be on your show. He's actually a pretty good talent. So thank you so much.
Yeah, Steve Dace does some talking for a living, so he does a nice job. No question about that. Are you still with us?
Yes, I'm here.
So before I let you go, because now we've done some more talking and my memory's shot, what do you want me to address? Who's ranking?
Well, I just feel like definitely Texas A&M seems high to me.
Texas A&M.
Also,
where's Texas A&M ranked?
Yeah,
they're not ranked.
I'm sorry. If that's the case, then I was in the gym watching. They had a 12 next to Texas A&M.
Oh,
so
okay. They were comparing resumes, and they were showing the Texas A&M rank at the time that they played Clemson.
Oh, okay.
Texas A&M is not even ranked.
Okay, good. Yeah, I was going to say if they're ranked, that's definitely an SEC bias because I don't see how they could be ranked or ranked in the top 15. And then I kind of felt like Minnesota, even though they haven't played really anybody yet, I feel like they would probably. I think they've gained a lot of confidence since the beginning of the year, and I feel like some people have maybe an opinion of them after playing Fresno State versus what they've done the last couple of weeks. They've kind of built a momentum. And also I would say UC with Luke Fickell, they're definitely underrated. I think they'll probably maybe get by with one more loss in a season, if that. So it'll be pretty interesting to see how they end up. But
So you bring up an interesting argument in regards to teams' improvement or decline during the course of a season, and whether that should be taken into consideration, or whether it's a basic evaluation of you take each game as is, regardless of whether it was played in September or November, and every game needs to be evaluated on face value as being equal in its importance. Those are two different theories right there.
yeah, I would say too, like if you're undefeated and you're getting better each week, that has to be. I would say there has to be a little bit more weight on that team than maybe a team that's lost a game or two. Just because, like, if you lost a game early or 2 games early, you're kind of out of it. Especially if you lost twice. But if you are undefeated and each week you're getting a little bit better, and Minnesota has been they've gotten a lot better since the beginning of the year. I'm just surprised that they're ranked at 17 or where they are in the rankings. I thought they would be a little bit higher. And then the Pac-12. I actually like how they had them represented. I think they have a real good shot of getting in if things play out the way I kind of see them playing out. So.
All right, sir. Thank you so much for the call.
Big Ten, Pac-12,
Yep.
and SEC Big 12 match. So that'll be good. That'll be good.
Well, thank you so much for the call. I appreciate it.
ACC. Yep. Have a good one.
You too. Bye-bye. All right. Let me take care of some operational business right here, and you guys take care of the live chat. It'll take me just a second. I see some rumblings of some issues in the live chat. I hate to see that. So hopefully you guys are self-policing in the live chat right there, and hopefully that works. Give me a producer one of these days. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
Hi, this is Josh from BYU.
Hey, Josh. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing just fine. What's up?
Yeah, this is actually the first time I've been able to call into your show, and I just want to say I'm a fan, and I discovered you a couple weeks ago. But yeah, I'm excited to talk about the reaction to the poll that was just released probably about 30 minutes, an hour ago, maybe.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. So what hit you?
Definitely, yeah. So, yeah, as I was like watching everything, I was actually at the store with my wife, but as I was watching them like the top 6, I was a little bit nervous that they might like place Ohio State at the 3 like they do in the AP poll. And when I saw Alabama there and saw that they kind of broken up the 1-2 matchup for the quote unquote game of the century rematch, I was kind of excited to see that, and seeing that the committee was taking into account not just like a strength of schedule of like a quote unquote dominant SEC, but just like how Ohio State has been dominant like the entire season. I did, however, think that LSU with the way that they've played against like top 10 opponents, even though maybe some of those opponents like aren't in the top 10 currently, that maybe they deserve that number 1 spot. And then I looked back down at my phone and I saw LSU number 2. And even though I go to BYU, I'm actually a huge Ohio State fan, so I was freaking jumping for joy seeing Ohio State at number 1.
All right. Yeah, there's a couple different ways to look at it. Certainly there are eyeball test people, there are resume people, there are dominance people, which to a certain extent is the eyeball test. And then there are people that try to put them all together and categorize and prioritize those in particular. I'm a resume guy. That's why I've got LSU ranked at number 1 and Ohio State at number 2. I'm a resume guy first and foremost, and then I'm a guy that looks at, in addition to the results, the performance, and then of course the schedule means a whole lot in all of this. What intrigues me is that what was mentioned during the broadcast is that Ohio State has a better strength of schedule than LSU. That surprises me. I would like to go back to both schedules. I've got them in my head, but I would like to rank the teams on each schedule 1 through 8, and then kind of do that comparison to see if I really think Ohio State's got a better schedule than LSU at this point. Of course, that's all going to change coming up this Saturday when Alabama gets added to LSU's schedule. But of course, in a couple weeks, Penn State and Michigan are going to be added to Ohio State's schedule.
Right. And I actually just looked at the Sagarin ratings today and saw that Ohio State actually had that number 20 strength of schedule, which I was a little confused about as well. I'm not sure if they are taking like the whole season into account, like, anticipating that Penn State game and even that Michigan game after Michigan blew out Notre Dame a couple weeks ago. Or if it's just taking like into account the Wisconsin win and the Michigan State win and even the Nebraska and Cincinnati win for Ohio State. Because if we're looking at like the at the time wins of like LSU beating number 9 Texas and then LSU beating a top 10 Auburn and a top 10 Florida, I would say that on the resume that LSU would have like the leg up on Ohio State. So yeah, like just putting the like have the games that they have played already side by side next to each other, I would have thought that LSU would have had the upper hand on the resume at this point.
Yeah, I think that's also an interesting conversation in regards to whether we evaluate the teams on the schedule at the time that they played the game versus the current result of that particular team. And the classic example of that was Alabama being selected to go to the playoff in 2017 as a non-conference or division winner when they had Florida State on its schedule as the number 3 team in the country the first week of the season, but Florida State finished at 6-6. So the debate was Florida State actually that good at that point with DeAndre Francois at quarterback, or should they be evaluated as a 6-6 team and therefore Alabama's schedule is not nearly as impressive? I think every case is a bit different, and the circumstances and the level of play and the either improvement or decline of that particular team has to be taken into effect and into account.
Right, and everybody wants to include like this transitive property in the comparison, even from year to year. Like there's a lot of Clemson fans out there who are crying foul with Clemson at number 5 at this point, or even Clemson like kind of moving down the rankings over the past several weeks because of their lack of strength of schedule and lack of playing anybody outside of Texas A&M, who they only scored 24 points against at home. But the truth is that like there's not a level playing field. Like there's going to be bias out there, and there's going to be tons of different schedules and so many different measurables that you can take into account. Just aside from like the look test, and even injuries taken into account, like you said, like DeAndre Francois, like in that first game, which he actually got injured in. Would Alabama truly get credit for beating the number 3 team in the country when they actually finished 6-6? And in this case, is LSU getting credit for that Texas win? I think it was in week 3 or 4. Being a top 10 team at that time, but then struggling over the last several weeks themselves, and then coming up unranked here at the beginning of the college football playoff rankings.
Yeah, and that's another reason why, at least when I approach my rankings, I tear them up every week and then I start over, because any particular win or loss either gains value or loses value based on the performance of that team. Even though you don't see them 3 months later, that team has either proven to be better or worse than what we thought they were at the time of that particular game. So we have to constantly reevaluate everybody's schedule.
Mm-hmm. Right, and like that, the strength of schedule, may be one thing at the beginning of the season, and then be an entirely another thing at the end of the season, as we are like reevaluating these teams and taking into account injuries or home and away like losses, or like the margin of victory, or even like rankings and rivalry games and that such. But at the end of the day, like it's like when I argue with people, on Instagram all the time about this kind of stuff. When they say like, oh, Ohio State is too high, or Alabama is too low because I'm an Alabama fan and they should be higher, or I hate Ohio State just because they should be lower. And I'm just like, guys, like really, you just have to take it with a grain of salt and understand that we've got a lot more football left to play. And like when the committee sits down on December 4th or 5th, whatever day it is, to decide the final rankings and decide who's our Final Four going to be, then we can really like break it down and look at like, okay, what have the committee valued over the course of these last few weeks, and like what are we going to see going forward? Because over these last 5 years, I think we've seen something different in those final rankings every single year, and something that we scratch our head about, or something that we're like, okay, so what are we expected to do, whether it be in the non-conference, or whether it be like towards the end of the season, or whether it be in the conference championship games. And so it's really just like keeping everybody on their toes, like trying to figure out, like, okay, how do we actually get into the playoff, and how do we break it down to a science when really there isn't much of one at all.
Very good. Anything else on the rankings?
No, I think that should be it for me.
We appreciate the call. Thank you so much for watching. Appreciate it. Have a good one. All right. Trying to get to as many of these comments in the live chat as possible. Some people don't believe that the Big Ten is a very good conference. I see that from a number of people. Don't know what football they've been watching this year. So let's look at some of the key teams that are vying for playoff position. You got to think at this point that Ohio State holds its own destiny in its hands. Obviously, it's number one, and they've got a number of difficult games ahead of them and to win a conference championship. Ohio State, Clemson, LSU, Alabama definitely control their own destiny. They're undefeated. They play in major conferences. They're well respected. Then, in addition to that, we've got, and LSU. Did I say LSU, Alabama, Ohio State, Clemson? For sure. We would also have to put Georgia in that bucket, even though they've lost one game. They play in the SEC. If they win the SEC championship, they're going to the playoff. Oklahoma, Oregon, and Utah would be next in line in regards to controlling some kind of fate for themselves, but needing a little bit of help, most likely.
The call will start at the beep.
Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
Hey, Mark, I'm sorry to call you back.
Oh, that's all right. What's up?
All right. First off, Luke A., he says that Ohio State, Clemson has never beat Ohio State. Clemson's beat Ohio State like 3 times.
He's probably just trolling a little bit and just wants to get somebody's goat. I gotta think. Or maybe he's been watching college football for about 3 weeks. I don't know.
Okay. Let me ask you this, and I just caught on to this. How was Georgia above Oregon and Utah? And Georgia loss was a lot worse than those 2 losses. Utah lost to USC on a Friday night, and at USC, Oregon lost to Auburn in Dallas. I think they played, right?
Sure.
So how did they come up with Georgia being ahead of them, and they lost to South Carolina at home, who's I think have a below 500 record?
Well,
I know you can't tell me what they were thinking, but I'm just saying. Did you notice that too?
Oh, absolutely. So, DeAndre, you've got a great point. But we are not only evaluating the losses, we're evaluating the wins. So there is no question that what you just stated is logical. That losing to South Carolina, a pretty marginal team at home, is the worst loss among all the contenders in the top 10 or so, versus Oregon would have what we could consider the best loss out of those teams in a game in which they were showing to be the better team for most of the game. Then they blew a 21-6 lead, and they lost in the last 9 seconds of the game against Auburn. And of course, the Utah loss, though, not looking so good against USC right now, although that was on the road, and it was against, I would say that USC, the two USCs, meaning South Carolina and Southern Cal, are fairly comparable teams right now. I still think the USC out in the Pac 12 is probably a little bit better, but they're pretty comparable. So I don't know if that's necessarily decidedly a worse loss, but certainly a much worse loss than what Oregon suffered.
Right. And I won't let you get off after this. I just saw something else weird. Let's say Baylor beats Oklahoma.
Yep.
Oklahoma will have 2 losses, but they play in the championship game at the end of the year. Oklahoma beats Baylor and makes Baylor like 11-1 or whatever.
Sure.
But do you think Baylor will still make the playoffs?
No.
Because that game.
No.
Because I see that. I know you don't like predicting what's going to happen in the future because they haven't played those games. But Baylor's schedule gets harder as it goes on, so their schedule will increase. Their strength of schedule will increase as it goes on.
Sure.
So that's why I'm asking.
Well, what would be working against them is, number one, they're not a conference champion. Number two, their non-conference schedule was one of the worst in the nation. It was horrible. I think it was mentioned tonight that the 3 teams that they beat in non-conference play have 4 wins total between the 3 teams. Like they've all won 1 game, basically. And Baylor, if you believe in conspiracy theories, is not going to get the nod over some other teams that have bigger brand names. That's if you believe in that theory that the College Football Playoff Committee wants the Blue Bloods and the top name teams to be in the playoff and will always give them more consideration. But if we just stick to facts.
Probably don't want that brought up about Art Browse all over the playoffs, too, again. They don't want to rehash that, too.
Maybe not. But if we stick to the metrics and the results on the field, Baylor is not going to get to a playoff without winning the Big 12.
Okay.
No, that's.
It's just curious.
There would have to be just upheaval all over the place for that to happen.
Well, so let me ask you this. Why have they lose to Oklahoma in the regular season and beat Oklahoma in the championship game?
That's a different deal.
Okay. All right. All right, Mark. I enjoyed the show so far.
Thanks, DeAndre.
It chill with that because that's what I said. Clemson's done murdered Ohio State. Outside of Minnesota, I don't think anybody in the Big Ten has a winning record against Clemson. Because I know they played Penn State a couple times in bowls. Illinois definitely doesn't have it. Ohio State doesn't have it. I don't think Michigan has it either. That's kind of funny.
Has Michigan ever played Clemson? I don't recall them ever playing.
It was before our lifetime.
Okay.
I mean, he was on the verse.
Okay. All right. I was going to say, I don't remember that one. All right, DeAndre.
Okay.
Appreciate the call.
All right, bye.
I see a couple comments here. One's from Big Brother about the transited property. So if you want to play the transited property, I've talked people into circles using the transited property just to prove to them that unless you're undefeated, you can prove any team's better than any other team by using the transited property. What you can do, though, is use multiple common opponents. And we'll talk about that in just a second. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
Chris Harris.
Hey, Chris.
Good. How are you?
I'm good. What about these rankings?
I like them. I think they're spot on. I was wanting to run a scenario by you real quick.
Okay.
So what do you think would happen if Alabama beat LSU, but then Alabama lost to Georgia in the SEC championship? You have 3 1-loss SEC teams.
Sure. So what is going on elsewhere?
I'll have Clemson going undefeated, Ohio State undefeated, and a one-loss Penn State.
Okay, so Ohio State and Clemson are in, and you've taken out the Big 12 and the Pac-12.
Yeah, they both got losses. I think the other
Okay.
teams have just
Let's say they've got 2 losses and whatever happens. Okay, so we've narrowed it down to these 3 conferences with Clemson and Ohio State in. So you've got those 3 teams plus Penn State in play with 1 loss.
Yes,
So-
one loss would be to Ohio State.
Yeah. And Georgia runs the table, beats Alabama in the SEC championship game. LSU has a loss to Alabama in a close game.
Yes.
Well, then it comes down to resume and conference championships. So Georgia is going to be in the playoff if they beat Texas A&M, Auburn, and Alabama and win the SEC.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So that's going to be your 3rd team. And then it's going to be a decision made over Alabama and LSU and Penn State. So to me, Penn State has a better resume, will have a better resume at that point than Alabama. Penn State will have lost to the number 1 team in the country because Ohio State's going to stay number 1 based on what's been established here by the College Football Playoff Selection Committee here in this first week. They have said Ohio State's the best team in the country, and if Ohio State continues to win, they shouldn't. They've got a tough enough schedule ahead of them with Penn State, Michigan, and a Big Ten championship game to maintain that ranking. So Penn State's going to have the best loss on the board as long as it's a close loss. So if let's say they both lost 31-28, meaning LSU and Penn State, yeah, that's a difficult call, and Alabama's in the mix as well. And Alabama actually would have the worst resume because they played the easiest SEC schedule in comparison to LSU by far, and also don't have a decent non-conference game since they played Duke. Yeah, that one, boy, that is a rough one. But I'm thinking that Penn State's got the best resume out of those 3.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. I think we might see 2 Big Ten teams. I think they have the best chance of getting 2 teams in this year.
Well, on one hand, I can agree with you if you think, as many people do, that Ohio State and Penn State are the 2 best teams and nobody's going to beat them outside of their matchup. But the SEC has the advantage of having 3 teams in play.
True. Well, that's all I had for you tonight, and I'd like to thank you for taking my call.
We appreciate the call, man. Take care.
No problem. Bye-bye.
All right, Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. I appreciate the contribution that came in from Jonathan Thomas. Thank you so much for that. I hope I didn't miss any other Super Chat contributions. I think there was 1 or 2, possibly others. I'm scanning the live chat for those as well as your comments. If anybody has a comment or a question that they made to the Super Chat or to the live chat that they would like me to answer, please just copy and paste it and just paste that in the comment section of any of the videos, and I will do my best to get to it. All right. It appears as though we've done enough damage talking for the last 90 minutes on the college football playoff rankings. So keep in mind, we will be back here tomorrow or next week, obviously, to address the updated rankings. We've got our 2 live shows coming up tomorrow night. We've got Florida State Talk at 7, much to talk about in regards to Willie Taggart's demise and, of course, his replacement, and Miami Football Talk at 8 o'clock Eastern Time live on a Wednesday night. We're moving the Ohio State show, Ohio State Buckeyes Talk, Thursday night at 7 o'clock Eastern Time. I'm getting to as many previews of Week 11 as possible. Please check out those previews. I've got my predictions at the Voice of College Football Community. So let me stop down right there for a quick second. Keep this in mind. That should say Week 11. My weekly predictions are available exclusively at the Voice of College Football community. You can find that link at the description section of any of the videos, and it goes way beyond just getting predictions. So we're building a community, and we would like you to be involved. And what I'm offering there as well is exclusive live streams for anybody by request. So that allows you to come on with me and talk college football directly. And also, and I will take this call in just a second. We want to remind everyone, with Christmas coming, please help out the channel and build the channel by grabbing the link in the description section below that says Shop Amazon. It's the same exact shopping experience. Just grab the link and do your Amazon shopping using that link. And there you go. You don't have to spend an extra penny. You don't have to buy the product. Just use the Amazon link. All right, everyone, we appreciate you jumping on board. And of course, we're headed straight toward another big college football weekend with Penn State taking on Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, and of course, the big matchup with Alabama and LSU. And we will preview all of those games, plus more, right here, Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Thank you so much. Have a great night, and we will see you all back here tomorrow night, live at 7 o'clock Eastern for Florida State Live, followed by Miami Live tomorrow night, right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Thank you so much for your support. I appreciate it more than you will ever know. Thanks, Cheryl. We will have a lot to talk about regardless of who plays who, but certainly based on the recent chat here, if Ohio State and Clemson hook up in the college football playoff, look out. Look out. See y'all later.